Hi everyone, today's topic will be on leasehold properties, lease decay, comparing it with freehold, and how to make sense of it altogether. Alright, I got this inspiration after seeing this article on Business Time not too long ago. It mainly talk about this particular plot at Chempaka area. It's in the east, quite near to Tanah Merah. So it's a landed residential. It's on 70 years, if I'm not wrong. Right now, they're only left with 10 years lease. So if you have seen on Property Guru, some of this landed at very low PSF. I think it's only asking around 200 plus PSF. Don't be fooled by it because they are only left with 10 years lease. But looking at how things are going, and there's one particular precedence before COVID, talking about these Geylang landed properties that actually went to zero, that the authorities didn't extend the lease. So I doubt that there would be any chance of it, especially having this precedence and being in the landed area. Okay, so since talking about this, it's good to really reflect on time, what happened in the past. You know, there was this huge debate over lease decay, but we realized that after COVID, right, when demand for housing was so crazy, the entire lease decay issue didn't really surface. But with this article, and I think moving forward, as more properties become aged, later I will show you more some of this analysis. I think this is a real issue. So to really take note of if you're holding on to certain properties. Okay, so right here now you see this very notorious article. Why do I say notorious article? Because it created a lot of debate, a lot of unhappiness among HDB owners when it surfaced on Straits Times, and then people were talking about whether HDB was even an asset to begin with, right? And you're asking if SIRS is going to be for everyone. If you look at this chart, you realize that, you know, of course, it is stated from 56 years lease tenure onwards. You know, you see quite a significant decay in pricing, right? A significant point would be at the 60 years mark. That means after 40 years have passed for a 99 years property, I think the main determinant is how much CPF can be used. You know, there are certain restrictions where when this particular property is left with 60 years, certain form of calculation, if you look on the HDB website, you know that, you know, you cannot really use 100% value for your CPF usage. So it's something to take note of, and I think over here, it really showed, like, you know, when it's left with 35 years, you know, the drop, it's more and more substantial. Okay, but besides that, I'll just show you this particular Bala curve. I think it really explains simply from the 99 years at the start all the way to the end, how is the value affected when it's pegged to a freehold property with, of course, the same attributes, right? So you can see just now I mentioned 60 years is the main determinant, because after the first 40 years, the decay, it's not as significant. It probably, if you look at from the 96% to 80%, it's only a drop in 16%. But from the 60 years on to the 30 years, the drop, it's more exponential, and you can see a 20% drop in value in a reduced amount of time in just 30 years. So I think it's a good reminder of our property when we look to review it and see how is it going to perform moving forward. And it's also good to look at it in relation to what we want and how the market is performing, and then come up with a right property strategy. All right, so this is of course case by case specific, and it will depend on your situation. You see, the point to note is that there is no real precedence for Singapore. Now, being only just 59 years old, right? We independence in 1965. So most of our leasehold properties, they are 99 years, and of course launch in small quantities at the start of 1965, and then slowly increase upwards. So we haven't really seen the main bulk of flats that are reaching this critical 6 years or less, 60 years or less tenure left. But that will be very soon. Okay, so I pull out this particular chart from the HDB annual report. I key in all the figures. I created this chart, and I just want to understand when is the largest bulk of flats that were built that would face this 60 years left mark. right? That means these flats that reach 40 years old. Okay, so if you look based on this 5 years period, those that are built in the 1980s, where you see the red arrow, and the most number of flats, more than 180,000 from the 1981 to 1985 period. And actually 1981, actually they're already 40 years old in 2020, right? Of course, if you're taking from 1981 all the way to 1990s, I think that would add up to what? 280,000 flats that were being built. That's a huge bulk of flats. I think that would be right smack. We are already into it. We are in 2024. By 2030, all of these flats will be less than 60 years old. And I think this is a critical juncture, and especially after this COVID craze whereby the demand of house it's waning, I think the concern will surface again. I also added in terms of accumulative, so you can see more clearly when it's the largest increase, right? If I include all the flats in totality, there will be less than 60 years left when they are more than 40 years old. The biggest jump, of course, will be in this period where we are at right now. From now in the next 5 years, you can see the 1980s one, right? There's an increase where the red arrow is. There's an increase in 50% of the flats that were being completed then. When all of this come on stream, I think there will be a lot of noise on the ground. So some of you may be thinking, hey, will my flat undergo SIRS? I mean, some of our parents' place, grandparent place actually underwent SIRS. SIRS is a short form for Selective En Bloc Redevelopment Scheme. In short, it's always we use this word called en bloc, right? But if you see from this particular article, in 2017, by our current Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, who was then Minister of National Development, who said that only 4% of HDB flats have been identified to undergo SIRS. Yes, of course, now 7 years later, that list might be more, so we might be having more than 4%, but we are still a far cry, right? So to really expect your flat to go through SIRS, I think it's a wrong expectation, because only a handful will be selected. So just to give you certain figures, right? If you look at the whole of the Bidadari HDB estate that were developed, right, there are only 8,800 flats. All the land over there at the Woodley, starting from Potong Pasir, Woodley and Bartley, that big piece of land. And then on the larger scale, recently we had this redevelopment of this entire Tengah town. All the HDB flats that you're seeing there, the rows of BTOs, the total number of HDB flats, when I looked up, it's only 30,000 units. Yes, it sounded a lot, okay, but if you compare with the accumulative flats that would be 40 years old right now and moving forward at 600 over 1,000, 660,000, you look at the chart before that, it pales in comparison, right? It's not even sufficient to replace. So definitely, this lease decay will really affect our property. Okay, so it's not just HDB. The private residential units will also face the similar issue. Okay, over here you'll see this chart from 1988 to 2023, the total number of private residential units. Okay, I didn't get specific info, so this one will include, I guess, both the freehold and the leasehold properties, but because they're all in totality, I think it does give a certain picture on exactly when would the main bulk of units be built and reaching the 40 years old mark. So in this chart, you realize the biggest jump will be in the 1994 to 1995 period, depicted by the red arrow. So judging from that, and when they are 40 years old, it will be around 10 years later in 2035. I guess this will be a bit later because the land sale at the start at Independence wouldn't be as many, but it should start to grow more and more until the 1990s, where I guess there are more affluent locals around to buy private properties. Okay, but you will still face that same issue. Of course, they also would have their own en bloc, they will collectively, collective sale committee and go for this en bloc and get it sold to a developer to be redeveloped. But I don't think it will be all done. It will be done for 100% of the private residential too. Okay, so in both HDB and private residential, you'll meet this issue. It's just that there are tons of HDB flats and they're all reaching, this 40 years old mark in this current present time, and especially in the next 5 years. Okay, so this is another chart I want to show to actually show some opportunities. Okay, talking about leasehold properties. I mean, if you have the means, it's always good to upgrade. I'm not saying that all leasehold properties are not good, especially the newer ones with a fresh lease. You can see generally in the first 20, 30 years, it's quite unaffected, right? But take a look at this chart where it compares the prices between the freehold and leasehold properties. You can see from 2016 all the way to now, all right, the difference between the freehold and leasehold pricing were originally around the 22 to 24% difference. But at present time, the difference, it's only around, let me see over here, it's only around 13%. So it's 10% less in difference, but you can see a drastic difference since almost 10 years ago. Why is this so? I guess it's because recent leasehold properties are selling quite expensive, and there are a lot of new government land sales that bidded at a high price since 5 to 10 years ago and sold at a very high price. So bearing in mind the declining lease, the lease decay issue, and the declining difference between the freehold and leasehold pricing, I think there are certain opportunities you can look at in the freehold properties. Right. Of course, you have to be product specific. This is just a gauge overall. So to just sum it all up, to let you understand what it means for you in your current situation, although I try to be as general as possible, so I cover the most number of audience and situation. But if your case is specific, you can reach out directly to me to assess. All right. Okay, so first point, I just want to highlight here that owning a leasehold properties is definitely okay. Don't need to be scared. All right, whether it's HDB or condo, especially if you're staying in the HDB, it's definitely better than staying in a rental property, okay, than renting a property. Why do I say that? I actually mentioned this issue on lease and being supported by the renters in my industrial video, because B1 industrial, the new ones are only 30 years lease, the older ones may be left with 10 to 20 years. Why are the prices being held up and still well supported? It's because the renters are supporting it. So let's say the HDB is well known that the rental yields are 5% in excess, all the way up to 10%. Of course, we take the current value. Let's say your HDB right now is 5% yield. All right, in 20 years' time, instead of owning the HDB, if you flip the situation and you rent a property and you pay a 5% on that, right, on an annual basis, in 20 years' time, you actually fully pay a HDB. So if the HDB is left with 60 years, it's still okay because you got 40 years of free usage. Correct? Because if you're going to rent for another 60 years, you're going to pay 3 times the price of the HDB right now. So it's definitely okay to own the HDB because the yield is supporting the price. And if you if you put yourself in a rental situation, you will still be paying more because you ultimately need a roof over your head. Okay, so this is very important. And the fact that if you own a property, no matter what, the control is down there, there's certain intrinsic value that cannot be measured by monetary values, right? Own house, your memories inside, just the flexibility in using the space is definitely better than renting, because renting, all the decision solely lies with the landlord on whether you can extend the lease and things like that. Okay, so that's the first thing to establish over here. So the second point, of course, talking about all this, I think at the end of the day, it's also important to always reassess your asset in a very timely fashion. Why? Because you really want to know whether your asset is working hard for you. You're using a good amount of CPF, good amount of cash in your down payment, and if you have fully paid up your property, especially those of you who have used a lot of CPF to pay up your HDB, the accrued interest is always eating into your HDB values. And if your HDB values stagnate or even drop a bit, it is eating into your equity. And in exchange, you're also, you're forgiving the 2.5% that the government is giving you if it was to be left in the OA account. Okay, now I know it sounds quite a mouthful, you can repeat that sentence. But in essence, you really want to make your CPF and cash that you use in your current place work harder for you. So if your house is stagnating and you find that you are still, having the ability to work, to take a loan, you're still growing in your income, you still have a certain risk appetite, I mean, you can continue to elevate your asset. Always seek to elevate your asset. I always have this principle of having, a certain amount of nest egg in terms of my property asset value by the time I'm 65. I emphasize this 5 million mark because I think it's critical, especially in a married setting, in a husband and wife setting, where you own two properties or you have two combined names in a higher value property like a lender, to have at least 5 million fully paid up by the end of your working life at, let's say, 65 years old. So you can have access to downsize, that you can live on, or can use the other property for rental, things like that. So always elevate your property when you can, and make sure it works hard for you. Bearing in mind today's topic about the lease decay, especially if you are staying in a old HDB and you are at the age where you can actually take on more risk and upgrade. Okay. Lastly, of course, would be that freehold properties right now, I think there's a lot of opportunities because the leasehold properties are selling at certain pricing already. And when you really evaluate all the residential property asset classes, I think there's a reason why good class bungalow landed. They are the cream of the crop because of the pure fact that there's just a finite supply. You can never increase the number of good class bungalow unless maybe say one particular plot is so freaking big and it's gazetted, of course, in a good class bungalow area, and it still can be subdivided in the good class into many good class bungalows. If not, it is finite. And the other main quality is because they are freehold. That's why other normal landlords are also doing well. So you got your good class landlord, good class bungalow landlords, then after your normal landlord. And I think the next asset classes will definitely be freehold condos. Of course, freehold residentials, there are different kinds. We want to seek the one with the best qualities. What is the best qualities? There's a huge topic about that altogether. Maybe I'll leave that for another day, or you can ask me on the sideline. All right, so I'm happy to share with you today's topic. I hope you've gained some insight. So I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.